Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm your host, Sam Chase, and with us this evening I have two guests actually, very unusual. We have Linda Prescott, who is the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. And what else are you, Linda?
I'm the co-chair of the Historical Commission Committee.
Okay, very good, and there may be some linkage there. And we also have Town Manager Paul Cohen to help us with the discussion. So, Linda, what we usually do is we start off, this is your first time on this show.
Yes.
So what we usually do is we ask our guests to give us just a very, very brief biographical sketch of your town service, or whatever you would like to say, and then just to introduce yourself to the audience, and then we get into the discussion. So,
well, I've lived in town for just over 35 years. I'm a blow-in. And if you remember, there was two women that did a lot of historic research. One was Jane Drury and the other was Tori Gully. And they recruited me for the Historical Commission. And from there, I was off and running. I love the work. I do a lot of it. So when the Community Preservation Act was accepted by the town, that was April of 2001, the commission voted to send me to that committee. And it's a fascinating job.
And the rest is history, as they say.
As they say.
So now that's interesting. So we've been dealing with the Preservation Committee since 2001. Has it been that long?
2001.
Wow.
I think
over 20 years.
Yeah, in September of 2000, Governor Cellucci actually signed the act into law. And we accepted it April of 2001. We knew it was coming, so we were campaigning long before that. And we were the third town in the Commonwealth to accept it. So
I remember, I was on FinCom at the time, and I vaguely remember this. So for the benefit of our viewers, of course, this has to be an act of town meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And we spent quite a bit of time working with town meeting reps, sending out postcards, putting up signs, to get it passed. And it did pass, which, in everybody's opinion, or a lot of people think it was a very good thing. We have done projects now that wouldn't have happened. The way the act is set up, it supports three different areas: affordable housing, historic preservation, and open space. They're notoriously underfunded, if funded at all.
Those areas traditionally are underfunded?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and these were the three areas. Now, the funding comes from, most of it from our tax bills. We have a surcharge that is 1.5%. If you look on your tax bill, it will say Community Preservation Act Fund. And all that money goes into a pot, a regular fund. And it is matched by the state, and we don't know how much will be matched every year. It depends upon how much money the Registry of Deeds makes. 100% of the money they make is dedicated.
If I remember correctly, when it first started, it was a 100% match. Is that correct?
That's correct. We only had 0.5%.
Right.
Yeah.
But then the state has ratcheted that back.
As more and more communities joined the program, you're dispersing the same funding level across more communities, and therefore they weren't able to maintain the 100% match.
We're 189 communities today. And what really tipped the scales recently was there was a change in the act itself, and the act evolves. It's fluid because things that you haven't thought about come up, and then they have to adjust for them, all kinds of stuff like that. But the biggest hit was when the act was changed to include parks and playgrounds. And that opened the door. That way, Boston, Worcester, Spring, they all jumped on. Those are huge accounts.
Did they justify that by claiming somehow that was related to open space?
That's correct.
Okay.
They redefined open space.
Well, if you don't like the rules, change the definition, right? Works every time.
Well, in the very beginning, you could only spend open space money on open space that was purchased through the CPC. And that wasn't working. So then they said, okay, it has to be open space, but you don't have to have it purchased by the CPC. And then the large cities began to grumble that they want to repeal it because they didn't have open space. They didn't have woods, but they had parks and playgrounds and things like that.
So there probably was some lobbying going on,
A lot.
I guess, from the larger communities that fell into the category you just described. Okay, so in other words, the typical political process that you could expect.
Yeah, yep. So it diluted the pot, having so many new big cities coming in. And the coalition, who is the Beacon Hill group that kind of deals with the State House, kind of looked for some extra funding. And there's a surplus account. And the first, I don't know, I think 10 million goes to research in Cambridge, genetic research. And the rest of it now was coming to us, which was about $25 million. But it wasn't part of the act. It's something every year. You're kind of at the whim of Beacon Hill. So what they're trying to do right now is finding a permanent source to add to the Registry of Deeds fees.
Okay, so right now, it's just the fees that collected through.
No, they do get into the surplus
Okay, all right,
reserves.
all right.
Yeah, when the state closes out the fiscal year, like the town, they'll have undesignated funds.
Right, okay.
And then they'll appropriate that towards the community preservation fund. But as Linda described, every year it's a lobbying effort and a pull to make sure that happens, because obviously there are other priorities in the state.
Yeah, and you don't know how much we're going to get from the state, what percentage. That varies from year to year.
But we're going to get something.
Yes, we are.
So for the benefit of our taxpayers, you have money that is a surcharge on your real estate tax bill, and those funds are allocated specifically to this purpose. You are going to get additional money from the state
Yep.
by way of whatever the state revenue sources are, primarily income tax and other things, I would
Right,
guess.
there are other funds.
Right.
And we won't know exactly how much that will be until probably the end of September, but beginning of October, when the budget is settled and it has been certified by the Department of Revenue.
About the same time we get our free cash.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the same.
It's waiting for the legislature right now to close out the fiscal year. The governor has a supplemental budget to close out the fiscal year, but they haven't enacted it. So it'll probably be a little later this year because they haven't finished the fiscal year
Sometimes
closeout.
we don't get anything till the beginning of November.
Yeah.
So right now, Darlene actually gave me the numbers that will be anticipated this year. Our fund is financed, or it's fed every quarter because it's real estate taxes.
Right.
So she kind of has to estimate through the year, but she's expecting that we'll bring in just over $1 million
For the year.
for the year from just taxes. The state, they're thinking it'd be just under $500,000. Then we make interest on the money we have, and that's about $13,000. So we'll bring in almost $2 million.
What do we have now in the fund?
770.
Our reserve balance is $772,000, right?
Yeah.
Now, just to make it clear to the audience, these aren't monies that are put aside and considered any kind of a general use or slush fund. The town manager can't say, hey, I need $1,000 or $10,000 here. No. So what happens? How do those funds get dispersed, allocated? Who makes those decisions, and so forth?
Yeah. Okay. There's a group of 9 people, and they come from various departments. There's affordable housing, historic preservation, open space. We have reps. We have for parks, we have our DPW, community development person. I mean, we have a variety, 2 town meeting reps. So there's a variety of people there, and we all work together to decide when a request comes in, does it fall under the Act? And the Act defines what you can use it for. Affordable housing uses most of their money for building 100% affordable units here in town. And that's good for our 40B, because you have to have X amount of money affordable housing.
Right.
And that's how they keep up with it. Historic preservation, it's used for the preservation of historic assets. And it can be structures, it can be houses, it can be, education, as in we have our sign program, but that takes research to verify the date and the builder or the first owner of the house.
Not to get off on a tangent, but again, for the benefit of the audience, what constitutes or who makes the determination as to whether a structure is historically significant and eligible for that kind of
The
thing?
Historical Commission.
The Historical Commission. Okay.
And then when that request comes in, it comes in through me. open space comes in through our open space rep.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and then we all kind of hash it out, work with it, and then decide. There have been projects that we do not feel really works either for the act or beneficial for the town. And
So the first exercise probably would be, for your committee to take a look at whatever the request is and make sure that it complies with whatever the legal provisions are that control how the funds can be dispersed.
the first step is to reach out to the group that will be sponsoring it. So you have, if it's historic preservation, you come to the Historic Commission. And then I'm the rep, so I bring it to the committee, the CPC committee. And then, there's a presentation, a discussion, and they decide whether it meets all of the rules.
Okay.
For it. And then we decide, we vote yes or no. Do we vote to send it to town meeting? Town meeting is the ultimate yes or no. We just kind of make sure that everything is what it's supposed to be. There are times we make recommendations because it doesn't really meet. You need to do something extra. There's all sorts of things that happen. So we hash it all out before it goes to town meeting.
But they're the gate for town meeting. In other words, a citizen petition article or any other article cannot go for obtain funding from town meeting on the Community Preservation Fund unless it has the positive recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee. So they are a gating board in terms of the access to the funds.
So it has to be an article that you have supported.
Yes, we vote.
Okay.
We vote to support it, and then it goes to the Board of Selectmen and goes on as a warrant article, goes on the agenda.
Selectmen put it on the warrant. Okay.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
So there's a method.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad, and I'm sure people
In fact,
feel
they
comfortable.
They have one coming up at fall town meeting next month. Maybe Linda can speak to that. Just the
Well,
request. It's a minor one, but
it's a minor one.
But it gives you an understanding of how the process works.
Okay, take us
We
through
have
that.
one thing, the Historical Commission is requesting $15,000 out of the historic pot. And what it is for inventories that help us protect the oldest buildings in town. And we've started working, like from when we were founded in 1653. We're right up to 1700. And every year, or 2 years, we like to come back for like 15,000. We hire a professional to do the inventory. It's involved. And if you go on the Historical Commission's webpage and hit homes, you'll see all the houses that have been done, all the inventories, and you can read them.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's good information.
Yeah, it's fun. And we also work with the assessor's office because if you see that your house was built in 1900 and you know it's old, it means nobody knows how old. So
Yeah, 1900 is the assessor's catch-all for.
that's correct.
We think it's at least 100 years old, and it may be
Yeah.
older. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So when we do our inventories, we always, catch up with them and make sure that they have the correct date. And then if the owner wants to, we can issue them a sign. There's oval signs around town with the date and the name of the first owner.
Very, very interesting. And I've seen those in other towns as well, so I'm sure that process is
It's a
pretty
small
standard.
thing that's coming up.
Right.
So how it works is Linda, who's the rep for the Historical Commission, brings the request to the full committee, and Linda described, they discuss it and debate it, and then once they make a favorable vote, then the article goes on the warrant, and then they make the favorable recommendation at town meeting. And so that's like I said, that's the gating procedure in terms of how you can use these funds. So as you noted earlier, Sam, they're not just unrestricted funds that can be used for any other purpose.
Yeah, and that's important for people to understand in this day and age of people being very suspicious of what governments do and don't do and so on and so forth. Controls, especially my experience in working in local government is especially in Massachusetts, the activities, especially the financial activities of a municipality, are just so tightly controlled and monitored by the state and other agencies as well. So it's very, very difficult to let that kind of thing get away from you. So, I want people to be assured that these kinds of programs, especially this one, because we're talking about a large amount of money here, have the proper oversight and management, and the process is very tightly controlled, as you've
And any-
described it.
Anybody's welcome to attend a meeting.
And the meetings obviously are all open, like
Yes, they're
every other,
open,
and
yeah.
posted and so on and so
Yeah,
forth.
and we'll-
You're not televised, however.
No, we're not.
Okay, that's probably
And-
why you have good meetings.
Well, we've had Zoom meetings, of course,
Yeah.
during the.
Oh, everybody loves those, yes.
Yeah, and we may pick them up once in a while when we don't have an article to vote on or to discuss for town meeting. Because we all found that Zoom meetings kind of, the conversation doesn't flow as well.
No, and sometimes you have technical issues as well, you know. And
Yeah.
not everybody's computer isn't necessarily up to it, you know, and yeah, going through the Zoom, I never cared much for it, so I
No.
think everybody's glad to get away from that as much as they can.
And I think honestly, the beauty of the fund and why it's been successful is the projects in this town that have been funded have been so visible. The North Town Hall restoration, the Center Town Hall now CCA building restoration, the preservation of the Warren Pole property, you know, the redevelopment and all the work that's going on at Roberts Field's been supported. Housing such as the Chelmsford Woods that David Hedison built on Littleton Road across from the Mobile Home Park, the new housing that David's going to construct over at 255 Princeton Street, the former UMass Lowell West campus. So those are sort of examples of tangible results.
Those are good
where the money
examples.
goes.
Yep.
And as I said, with the town and the state match, you know, sort of extends the town's, you know, investment in these properties.
And what I remember from my time in town meeting years ago when this first got started was when these things first came on board. Again, like any new process, people are not sure,
Yes.
they're scared, whatever it is. The initial things took a lot of time and effort, and it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll make a statement, you tell me if I'm right or wrong. It seems now that we've become so accustomed to this, and the process has worked so well through town meeting, that you don't get the same level of questioning, or it doesn't take quite as long maybe to make the argument that this should be. And I can't think of a time where town meeting ever turned down.
I do.
Okay, good. Tell us about it, because I don't remember. I
Just
don't remember.
recently, it was some work that the DPW needed to do for the Warren Pole property for
Okay.
lighting and safety.
In the parking
In the
lot.
parking lot. That was the most recent. But the first one that we put before town meeting was to have our section of the Middlesex Canal surveyed. And it went down with a big thud.
Don't remember that, but.
Yeah,
I'll
well, that
take
was
your
back
word
in
for it.
2002, maybe. And so we had to step back and say, okay, this is a good project, because we had been approached by the Middlesex Canal Association to have it surveyed, because they wanted to get it on the National Register of Historic Places. And the second time around, members of the Conservation Commission, Land Trust, our committee, everybody, got out there and they pulled weeds, and they took down some trees that were, saplings that were growing into the actual canal itself. And we invited town meeting members to come in, bring their kids, bring their bikes, bring their dogs, and walk the canal, because they could walk the tow road. On the way out, people I was talking to said, "This is a no-brainer. We need to survey this."
And then it goes down in town meeting.
No, this was before. The
Oh.
second time around, it went very, very well.
Good, good.
And it took 10 years from that date to get the Middlesex Canal in the National Register of
I
Historic Places.
vaguely remember that process. I'm sure Peggy Dunn must have spoken at town meeting, because she was a Middlesex Canal
Yeah, she could have.
commissioner. Yeah. So, yeah, long time ago.
Yeah.
But generally, the efforts have been successful.
Yes,
What is the largest project?
town halls.
The town halls.
That was, what, 5.2 million?
Yeah.
And as far,
And it's been paid off. That's the
Paid off 5.2 million.
yeah.
how did that? No, that's a good thing. Now, if I'm trying to remember, those were done at roughly the same time.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly the same
Exactly
time.
the same
Okay,
time, yeah.
all right. Different scope of project work. I mean, it was renovation, but the purposes, I think, were different, weren't they, for what ultimately the uses were going to be for those
The
two
uses were
buildings?
different. One's a
Yeah.
community center, one is a performing arts center.
Right.
But they were both public centers.
Right, exactly.
And so that basically, we were bringing them back in so that they could be used by the town. And at the same time, the Unitarian Church had a grant from us to repair the steeple.
Oh, I remember that.
Town clock.
That was
And
quite
the town clock
controversial,
was
as I
in it.
recall.
Yeah.
Which I understand is,
Separation of church and state. I remember that argument at town meeting.
so the town clock went out, and
Yep.
that was totally restored,
Yep.
extensive restoration with the church. And the church, was an identity like that, we like to have a 50% partnership. And so it was crazy for a while. There were cranes and steeplejacks swinging on the ropes and all kinds of crazy things.
I remember that. They fixed the clock, too.
Yes, they fixed the clock.
Yeah,
Yep.
which isn't always accurate, but that's
Well,
we live right in the center of town, and boy, we can hear that thing
Chime.
chiming away, especially in the summertime when you
Yeah.
have your windows open and so forth.
I live
It's
like
a ni-
a mile and a half away, and I can
And you
hear
can you can hear it, yeah. Actually, it's a nice sound. I like it.
I like it, yeah.
So we've done an awful lot of good projects. I can't think, why would we do a bad project, right? I mean, they've all been good and by definition approved by town meeting, so they've had that sanction on them. So where are we now in terms of funding and projects that are on the radar, if any?
Well, we're well-funded. We have last month we had Darlene come in, and she always gives what I call the state of the CPC. And her comments were that we're well-funded, we're comfortable. We can make land purchases, we can run, some of our bigger programs. One of the ones that will be coming up in the spring will be the continuation of the town clerk project, which is for the state mandated record retention law.
All right, so how
And-
does that,
And what happens is that the state mandates that certain paperwork has to be retained. And the paperwork can go right back to the beginning of the community. And, that nobody's
now
paid.
I'm-
Vital records.
I'm
Vital
getting, this
records.
is under the historical
preservation.
Right.
Okay, so.
Okay, so,
all right.
but that's a big bill. I mean, we send it out to
Yeah.
Northeast Documents. And I had the pleasure of visiting them a couple months ago. Amazing what they do. It just blew my mind to see how these people worked page by page. And we have a lot of documents in there, a lot of books being restored. And they digitize them. So when they come back, we can archive the books and we can work off the digital copies, which is very good. And it's expensive.
Oh, yes, yes.
And this is a multi-year project for the town clerk's office. So that's coming up. I know.
School Street Freight House.
I knew you were going to say. That's like the big.
Is that the
that's like
elephant in the room?
300-ton. I mean, it's just this School Street Freight House. I'm sure you're aware of it. I think most people know.
Take a minute to describe for the audience what and where that is.
That
Okay.
is on the corner of School Street and Main Street in West Chelmsford.
Yes.
The Freight House was a house where.
Right when you go down the little hill and you
Yep.
start to come up.
Right
Yep.
across the railroad
It's
track.
right, it's
Yep.
right at the
Right on-
railroad
Right on the
tracks.
railroad
Right.
tracks, yeah. And it's where the freight companies, the railroad would drop off freight to be picked up and would pick up freight going out. And when I moved to town, there was a retired gentleman, I guess from the train company, that actually ran a train store.
I remember, yes.
Yep, and we hear that all the time. And eventually, maybe he would stop doing whatever, and the house was closed up, it'd been abandoned, or not used.
It's right now in various stages of disrepair.
It is,
Yeah.
yes. So we had been trying for about 12 years to find somebody to move the house off the property, with no success. And then
This is the historical
the
commission.
Historical
Okay.
Commission. And then we knew that we didn't want the town to acquire it because we don't have a good record in keeping up old buildings. Town halls are a perfect example. So we decided, so Deb Taverna from the Garrison House, I guess, had a quiet conversation with Paul and said, we might want this. So
On the Garrison property.
on the Garrison property. So Paul made that announcement at a meeting, at a Board of Selectmen meeting, and I don't think he finished his comments, and I get a panic phone call from Deb. The board doesn't know yet.
They do now.
The next night was the board meeting. And all the board has agreed to, and this is as of Monday night, is to investigate whether this building is something we want to move. moving a building, even though it looks small, is a tremendous task. So they've had an outdoor inspection done by a historic preservationist. You can't use an engineer. These buildings are built differently, and an engineer just doesn't have the background.
But does the historical expert have an engineering background? Is he qualified?
No, he has a
Okay.
historic carpenter's
All right,
background.
all right.
It sounds crazy, but they're very well trained. This is what they do for a living.
Okay.
And they just fall under preservationist. And the next part of this will be, Deb is waiting for a phone call back from the CSX, who owns the building, to get in.
That's the railway.
That's the railway. To get in and look at it and do an internal view. We know that the clapboards and the siding have to go. What we have to do is make sure that the structure, the bones of the building are okay. If they are, maybe they'll probably move it. And then it'll be a decision how to move it. Do you put it on a trailer or do you take it apart? Now, the Spalding barn, which used to be behind the Fisk house, that was taken apart and rebuilt on the property.
Yes,
And of course, Hill Jock was moved on a trailer.
I remember it well.
I do too. And so they're, they're just big projects. So they need to decide. Moving it on the property, it will give them another education venue and a small meeting venue. Caterers can have access to it. So it could be a very good thing for them if it's structurally sound.
Okay, so just so I'm clear in my mind and the viewers as well, the historical significance of this particular building is what?
It is part of the rail system. And railroads were really a lot more important 100 years ago than they are today. And that building, it's the last of the complex that was in West.
Okay, so that's a sole surviving,
It's the sole surviving.
physical reminder of what once was. Okay, so that's the historical
Right.
nature. Okay.
And when we had the inventory done, it was checked off that it is a good candidate for the National Register of Historic Places.
Even better.
Now, once we move it, taking it out of context, it will no longer be considered a candidate for the National Register. Those places have to stay in
Now,
context.
okay, that's something I didn't even think of or realize, but that makes perfect sense because it's
That's right.
the fact that it's part of the real estate
Yes.
is significant. Okay,
And we tried to see if the railroad would carve off the portion of the land where the house is and convey that, and they won't give up land next to the railroad, obviously. So
Really?
we've tried 5 years ago, and we've tried again
Okay,
this year. And
all right.
So that would have been the perfect intent, would be to preserve it in its location. But interestingly, as Linda will note, that building has been moved before. It used to be on the other side of the street.
Yeah, there's these big I-beams
know that.
underneath that, which indicates it was moved.
Yeah.
okay, that makes perfect sense.
But it's
Yes.
still close enough to its original location.
All right.
And it was moved long enough, far enough in the past, that it is considered eligible for the National Register.
So under the process, as you described earlier in the show, the town would acquire the,
Or the town would fund.
building, or
the
fund.
bride would fund funding from the Community Preservation Fund to the Garrison House Association
Yeah.
to acquire and
okay, so
preserve.
the association would acquire.
Yes,
Okay.
they would apply.
Exactly.
All right.
And being a not-for-profit, and they're very much into education, it's a good choice.
Because it would be available to the community for public
That's
benefit.
probably, I mean, not that town meeting, if the town were to acquire it and do it that way, not that they would reject it, but this, I think, is even a better chance of having it
Any-
pass because the town isn't acquiring title to the.
That's correct. But
Right.
anything that goes for historic preservation and it requires, like it's a not-for-profit group, we have to make sure that they run programs or they have accessibility. The town has accessibility.
Okay.
Now, the steeple in the Unitarian Church, everybody, separation of church and state and the whole thing.
Oh, that was the big joke at town meeting, I
Right,
remember.
but there were several things. It's a cornerstone of the district.
Of course.
Our clock was in it, and they are accessible to the town. They're so good with all kinds of programs, health, like Alcohol Anonymous.
Oh, yes,
you
no,
know,
it's a very active.
It's incredibly
It was the
active.
site of the first town meeting house, too.
Yes, it was.
Well, that's the
It was
historic-
town meeting until
Town
they
meeting.
built
Yeah,
the north.
When the country started, there was no separation of church and state.
That's correct.
And that's part of the
And the
history.
ministers were the one that administered the law.
That's how the communities were founded. with the
Absolutely
parish.
correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely
And
correct.
if you read Reverend Bridges' diary, he was the minister during this Revolutionary War. He has quite a bit that he says about, where do I lead my flock? Because they could no longer be the Church of England. and he
Right.
led them to be the first parish.
Very, very, very interesting. We have 30 seconds left, Linda. Anything you want to say in now 25 seconds?
Not particularly, except thank you very much. I hope I made this, I hope.
I
it became
hope
clear.
so, and we may have you back later as events unfold. And thank you very much for coming and explaining all of this to us. And I certainly learned a few things. And Paul, thank you for backing up Linda and filling in a little bit of the technical details. So thank you both, and we appreciate having you on the show. And hopefully we'll have you back in the future.
And the public is welcome to it.